So good morning, everybody. So we are here for our somewhat consistently scheduled installment of Java with Jay. These are 30-minute, sometimes a little bit longer. We want to be respectful of everybody's time, but these are just some topics that we have found come up from time to time at the office that we feel are somewhat timely around different things that we talk about, with clients. And we like to kind of push it out to people and get people's thoughts on it and give you some information. And hopefully it's stuff that you find helpful. Hopefully it's stuff that you find actionable. And if there's any questions, we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. But we figure it lasts about as long as one cup of coffee, and then everybody can kind of get on with their day. So today's conversation, as we head into the holiday weekend for 4th of July, is around the always Boston summertime important question about how do people handle, or what are some ideas around handling a beach house or a vacation house or a lake house, depending on your pleasure. Freshwater, saltwater, doesn't really matter. But that's the idea. The idea is to make sure that you have an idea as to how you may or may not be able to handle your beach house and how that might work out. And so what we're talking about is a couple of different ways. It's like owning the other types of real estate or the other types of properties that you might own. But the difference is that if you somehow, have a piece of property that's related to a vacation property and some family memories, you might want to hang on to it, or the family might want to hang on to it for a lot longer than somebody else might hang on to a primary residence or a condo or something that you might inherit from mom and dad. And in addition to that, you may also want to share it with other people, and that can get a little bit dicey from time to time. So what we wanted to talk about were a couple of ways to hold your property. So what we have done for folks in the past, there's probably 4 different ways that we talk about handling beach property, vacation property. One of the ways that we talk about it is that we say, there's a way to hold a couple of things. One way to hold on to some of these things is through what we call a revocable trust. Okay. And it's basically a trust that you set up. You lay out all the rules that you need to lay out in terms of how a piece of property would get handled after you're gone. So the revocable trust allows you to basically take a piece of property, put it in a property, and then be able to set up all the rules that you need to set up for the property the way you want it to be handled. And the reason it's important is because after something happens to you, that property becomes, how you've set it up becomes irrevocable, because your revocable trust that you set up to lay out all the rules and how you may control things after you're gone, that essentially at your passing, the door is closed. The rules are set, you made the rules, and after you're gone, now those rules are locked in stone, and everybody who's a beneficiary of your trust now has to play by those rules. And those rules may be very different from the rules that you might set up for just your regular assets. All right. So for example, you may have liquid assets, you may have money at Fidelity, you may have money at T. Rowe Price, and your plans for that money might be something like, when I'm gone, give it to the kids, give it to the grandkids, whatever it looks like. But it operates as what we call a trust in distribution. The money just gets paid out to the beneficiaries. But the property or the real estate or the lake property or the beach property that's in a revocable trust that we may set up separate, you can have any number of trusts that we may set that up as a separate trust, that would then lay out all the rules that you want to lay out for how the property would be used. Now, this is where it can get a little bit challenging, in the sense that you're bringing together a bunch of people who may or may not want to spend time together. And so you may have to figure out, how do we dive into the details on who gets the property Labor Day weekend, who gets the property 4th of July weekend? Are we going to rent the property? Are we going to rent the property through Airbnb? Is it going to be through Vacasa? Are we not going to rent the property? And the reason that those things become an issue is because depending on the people you're bringing together, some people, there's usually 3 sort of personalities that come together when you own property like this, vacation property like this. There's one person who uses it a ton and can afford to use it and could afford to buy everybody out if that's what had to happen. And so for them, it's a pretty seamless transition. It doesn't really cause any issues for themselves. And then there's usually another family member who never uses it, right? I live on the West Coast. I don't have any use for a place on the Cape, but I really don't make any waves about it. I'm pitching in some money to help maintain the property going forward. And I'm kind of okay with the status quo. And then there's somebody who says, look, I want to use the property, but I can't afford to use the property, or I don't have the time to use the property, or my schedule doesn't allow me to use the property. And I think I want to get bought out, but maybe I don't want to get bought out because I like using the property and having everybody subsidize my vacation time. So you're bringing together people who are kind of looking at this thing differently, and you got to think about managing what that looks like and how that whole thing comes together. That's one of the challenges that you have to figure out. And so again, you have some people who say, look, I want nothing to do with this. I'd rather just get out of this. And so when you put your ownership rules together, you need to build these things into your revocable trust if that's the way you're going to do it. All right. And then you lay out the rules, how detailed you want to be. That's fine. And then you got to leave some flexibility. There's going to be a trustee who's going to take control or take charge of the property. That person is going to be responsible for making sure the bills are paid, making sure that they take care of the maintenance, they take care of the upkeep. They're the ones that have final say on whether things get rented or not. So you have to kind of think through some of those issues. The other thing you want to think through when you're setting up a property like this is, do you want to put some seed money, whether it's some seed money, a lot of seed money, inside that trust to cover the liquid assets that might be needed for things like maintenance, things like upkeep? So for example, do you place a beach house or a lake house in that revocable trust? And then do you put $100,000 of assets in there, for example? And then that way, if something happens, the house goes to the beneficiaries that you want to hold the house. There's some money in there that can then be used to pay property taxes and the maintenance and the upkeep. And again, if it's in a revocable trust arrangement, revocable trust setting, you are then in charge and in control up until you pass away. So you can add money, take money out, make changes to beneficiaries, and change the rules as you go forward. But again, you retain your control all the way through the process. All right. So that's using your trust, using a revocable trust as a way to just avoid probate and set the rules up for the property going forward. Now, by keeping the property in a revocable trust, if you're ever faced with a Medicaid or a nursing home situation, the house still counts as an asset. So if somebody ever went down the nursing home path and the Medicaid plan is something that's contemplated, in many cases, somebody might have a place down the Cape or a place up on the coast of Maine or something like that, and it's their only asset. And so they're concerned about whether or not the house becomes an asset for a nursing home, because the goal is to leave it as a legacy for the family, right? So the other option would be, do you put the house into an irrevocable trust? Now, when you put it into an irrevocable trust, you're essentially giving it away, all right? You're essentially saying, I'm putting this house in a trust. I'm cutting all the strings that would keep me in control of this property. So you pick somebody who's going to be the trustee. Maybe it's one of the kids, for example, if there's kids involved or another family member, something like that. And what you're basically doing is you're saying, I want the trust, I want the house off my plate. I want it in an irrevocable trust. I can't change my mind. That's the big thing that you want to keep in mind. If you put your house in an irrevocable trust and a week later you say, I think I should have done something different, I want to undo this, I want to unring this bell, the people who you make the trustees, the people who are in charge, have no obligation to unring the bell for you. They can say, look, you know what? We're not doing that. You put this in here for a reason. I know you changed your mind, but I'm not giving it back to you. So you really have to be comfortable with the idea of, I'm putting this property in an irrevocable trust. I don't have any connection to it anymore. You can have a little bit of control. Your control is limited to very administrative duties, if you will. You could change the trustee. You could change the beneficiary. You just can't give it back to yourself. So it operates much like the revocable trust. You set up all the rules. You put all the pieces in place, But once you transfer the property over, you are not in control anymore. There's language in the trust that says if it's a residential property, you have the right to use it. So they're not going to put you on the curb, but you are going to have the ability to control some aspects of it. But for all intents and purposes, we like to remind people that it's out of your control. You don't have any more control over it. Okay. Now, the positive of doing that is 5 years from now, that house is not an asset for Medicaid planning purposes. That gets the clock ticking to get this house off your plate so that it doesn't become an asset later on down the road. And just like with a revocable trust, you can still sell this house inside an irrevocable trust. So we try to get situations like this set up where the trustee is considered what we would refer to as a friendly trustee, which means if something happened, if there was a need to unring this bell for some reason, that the trustee would hopefully play ball with us. So the property could be sold at some point down the road, and then the cash or the money that the money the house turns into would then be distributed just like you've laid out the rules in the trust. And the reason that that's important is because in any of these scenarios, what I think is one of the most critical components that we can build into this plan is you have to try to think about building an exit ramp for people who are involved in this type of an arrangement, because there are going to be some people who say, for any number of reasons, I'm not interested in going to the lake house, the beach house anymore. I'm not interested in being part of this ownership arrangement. I just want out. I'm not using the property. I don't like subsidizing everybody else's vacation. I'd really like to get bought out. And what happens is a lot of people either don't want to do it because they like the vacation subsidy, or they can't afford to do it. They can't afford to do a buyout, but they don't want to lose access to the property and not be able to use the property the way they've been using it. And so this is where the tension starts to build. And so what you want to make sure in any of these arrangements is you some way, shape, or form build in some type of exit strategy for anybody who doesn't want to be in the deal. Now, we've done it where it's a question of votes. So depending on how many people are involved, everybody has a say. And if somebody wants out, then they have to basically ask to be out, and everybody can vote to let them out, let them in, whatever it looks like. The other thing that we've done that I think works really well is you give everybody an annual buyout option. Basically what happens is every year, come hook or crook, everybody has to sit down and say, yes, I want to stay in this arrangement for another year. Yes, I want to get out of this arrangement. I've been waiting 6 months for this opportunity. There's a window. It's a 30-day window. It's a 60-day window. And I'm now exercising my off-ramp option. And you guys have to figure out how to get me out of there. And if we can't figure it out, then it has to get sold to a third party. We take the money and we go our separate ways. What's nice about that is it creates kind of an automatic option for people who want to get out to not feel like they're sort of being bullied is too strong a word, but that they're being pressured in some way, shape, or form to sort of stay in the deal. If everybody knows they can get out once a year, it gives people a little bit more of a peace of mind. They don't feel like they're locked into this ownership arrangement. So that's the irrevocable trust. You're doing the same thing you do with a revocable trust. You're laying out the rules. You're laying out the way that you want the property to be handled going forward. You're going to name a trustee. You can name multiple trustees, and then they could figure out and manage kind of coordinating how the house is going to get used. And then they can also end up with an off-ramp strategy that you kind of set up and employ so that if people want to get out of that option, it's an easier option to get out of. And that way somebody can walk away if they don't want to be involved. No less chance of hurt feelings. The third option, we see this a lot, is people just deed the house to the kids right now. They call it a deed with the life estate. They basically say, look, hey kids, we've made great memories down here for a bunch of years. We're going to deed the Cape House or the lake house to you right now. And now that you have the house deeded to you, we, mom and dad, for example, have reserved the right to live here for the rest of our life. We can't get kicked out. We get the property. We get to use it. We make sure that you guys get it when we're gone. And the deed with the life estate accomplishes a couple of things. What it does is it transfers the property without any probate issues. Property just gets transferred straight away. If there's any taxes that are involved, meaning that, mom and dad paid 50 grand for the house 25 years ago, and now it's worth $500,000. The kids who inherit the house get what's called a step up in basis, which means they pay no taxes if they sell it shortly thereafter. So they inherit it and it's worth 500. If they sell it for 500, they don't pay any taxes. But the important thing is the $450,000 gain between the 50 mom and dad paid for it and the 500 that the kids inherited for, that goes away. All right. They don't pay any taxes on it. They just inherit it at $500,000. And then later down the road, whatever they sell it for above and beyond $500,000, that's what they pay taxes on. So the step up in basis is a really nice feature of the deed with the life estate. The other benefit, so in addition to avoid probate and step up in basis, the other benefit is it also starts that clock ticking for Medicaid planning purposes. So deed with the life estate, 5 years from now, that's considered a completed gift for Medicaid planning purposes. And now if we ever face with the nursing home Medicaid situation, those folks, that house doesn't count as an asset for mom and dad. Now, we like the deed with the life estate for people who own property when they can say with real certainty, like, this is it, we're not selling it. The only way we're leaving this place is if they carry us out of here. It's going to be held forever. But it can be a challenge on the vacation property side, because now you've got 3 family members, 4 family members, 2 family members, whatever it is, who now are going to own this property together. And that may or may not work out well, depending on the players. So if you get 3 family members who own a piece of property together, now they just own it together and there's no rules. It's not like it's in a trust and you've set the rules up. It's not like it's in an irrevocable trust and you've laid out all the rules. They just own a Cape house together, and that may work out really well, or it may not work out really well. And this is where we start to hear a lot of things. We hear one family member says, oh, we need to renovate this place. We need to spend some money. We need to really, I've been watching DIY Network all weekend. We need to gussy this joint up. And then there's other family members who say, look, we don't want to dismantle, mom and dad's house and make it look different than all the things that brought us these memories. We're fine with it just the way it is. Or we're fine with it just the way it is because we don't have the money to throw at it. We don't really care about throwing money at it. It's a beach house. And then what happens is somebody starts spending a lot more time down there. So you get 3 people who own it. Go back to our earlier example. One person's on the West Coast. The other person's down there every single weekend. And the other person comes down occasionally. And then all of a sudden you get 3 people saying, well, look, I'm subsidizing your vacation. You're using all the water. You're using the shower. You're using all the electricity and the gas. And I'm on the West Coast and I'm paying for it. I'm not using it that much. We need to figure out the ownership arrangement. That starts to get a little dicey. You got 3 people who own it and there's no rules. What happens in many cases is out of those 3 people, somebody has 3 teenagers and somebody has 3 toddlers. And so that's a recipe for disaster. When everybody comes down for 4th of July weekend, they all make equal claims to ownership as to, well, I can come down, I own a third. And if I can't make it, my kids are going down and the kids go down. And of course, the young kids, they're up all night, right? Swinging from the chandelier. And then the other owners got the toddlers. They're trying to get them into bed at 7 o'clock. And it's a recipe for real trouble because, again, sometimes people just aren't as respectful of other people as they should be, and it creates a real problem. So you get 3 people who own it. They can't agree on anything. The ownership starts to become troublesome. And then if they can't handle the buyout and they can't handle who's buying out for what amount of money, then what happens is the only solution is you end up in land court filing a petition to partition, which means the court's going to basically take the property, sell it to a third party, costs a lot of money, and everyone's going to get whatever they get when the dust settles. So not a great recipe because you just got 3 people owning property and they don't have a lot of rules. There's not a lot of guardrails to kind of see how that scenario is going to get handled. And again, the only out from there is just whatever they can agree to. And there could be other probate issues if people pass away later, and it gets a little messy because you think you're going to get stuck owning a piece of property with your siblings, and you end up getting stuck owning a piece of property with nieces and nephews, which may or may not work out well depending on your family dynamic. And then the last way that we try to suggest people think about owning a property, especially if the family wants to treat it like a business, is to set up an LLC or some type of corporate structure where the property goes into the LLC. There's an operating agreement that lays out all the rules of how the property is going to be handled, who's going to be in charge, who's managing it, who the members are. It lays out what happens if something happens to somebody. There's clauses in there that govern buyouts. There's clauses in there that govern deaths. You literally treat it like a business. And then if you want to rent it, you can rent it to, through Vacasa or through a private broker. You set up a business account. Any inflow that you get from renting the property out goes into a business account. The business account pays all the operating expenses for the property. It gets treated like a separate tax entity. So there's a little bit more work to doing it that way. But in many cases, it can be the cleanest way to do it. And I hate to say you're taking a property that you've had all these wonderful family memories at it over the years added to it, and then you treat it like a business. But for purposes of keeping the peace and avoid the gloves dropping every weekend, it could be the best arrangement. And then that way, everybody can get together. You have a meeting once a year. You can do the buyout clause. You can set your schedules up. You can talk about who gets what properties. And it just creates a little bit more structured arrangement for how the property could get handled. Now, sometimes it depends on the value of the property. If it's a little cabin, it might not make sense, but it at least gives you the ability to put some more structure to the ownership. We know who's in charge. We know who's making the decisions. We know what the rules are. And again, treat it like a business. Unfortunately, that can, in many cases, be the best way to go about it. So 4 different ways. One way is the revocable trust, separate revocable trust from your liquid assets. Think about whether or not you want to put some seed money in the deal so that if something ever happens, there's money to pay the bills for a little bit of time while everybody gets adjusted to the new arrangement. No protections from a Medicaid perspective. Irrevocable trust. Once you close the door on the irrevocable trust, you're not in control anymore. You get some Medicaid protections which have benefits, but you give up control to get that. Deed with a life estate, that can work out really well. 3 siblings, 4 siblings, whatever the number is, end up owning property together. Could be a challenge. There's not a lot of structure to it. You're bringing in nieces, nephews, you're bringing in other people, could create some problems. And then there's set it up like a business, own it like an LLC, something like that, get separate insurance on it, file some separate tax paperwork, but it's a lot more structured. And then again, we want to always mention that the key to the success in these plans is a very clearly defined off-ramp. And then even more important than that, who gets the beach sticker when it comes time to get the beach stickers? That's usually where things get ugly. So I will end it there, being respectful of our time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have as well. Yeah, fire away.
The very last one you mentioned, the LLC, how does that work with Medicaid or Mass Health? Is that also protected?
It is protected. It's out of your name. If you're leaving it to people in an LLC, if you're a member of the LLC, Medicaid may come looking to you for any income that might come your way. You're treating it as a business, and we would make the argument that it's a business necessary for your survival, if you will. That's what Medicaid looks at when you have business property. And then the income only is what they would be looking for. So whatever income you get, and it's a net income is what they'd be looking for. So we would obviously look to potentially massage those numbers a little bit. Yeah.
The potential for the but the potential for the person, the senior, who's gonna put it in LLC, they can, give it, set it up the LLC, and then 5 years later, they can apply for Mass Health with it not being an asset, correct?
Correct. That's right. If they're getting income from the LLC, Mass Health would want to know about the income,
That's it.
but that's it. That's all they care about. Yep. Anybody else? All right. Well, seeing nobody else.
All right. Yeah, one more question, Jay. So would you recommend any particular one of the four in a situation where it's currently jointly owned?
Yeah, I think what I would do is, I think I would want to know the dynamics, right? I think what we want to talk about is, what type of property are we talking about? What's the family dynamics like? How many kids are we talking? How many are involved? I mean, in some respects, it's really a question of I shouldn't say it's a family dynamic that's going to drive it, because it can always change. But I think we would just want to talk with the family to say, look, what are we concerned most about? Some people don't care about control. Some people can say, look, I could care less about control. My kids aren't going to block me from coming down and spending my weekends down here. They know that it's their house in name only. And so the irrevocable trust might work perfectly for them, right? Some clients might say, no, it is about control. It is my vacation house. I'm not willing to give up control of it. And so I'll do the revocable trust. I don't care about the Medicaid issue. Or they may have enough assets on the other side, separate and apart from the vacation house, that the Medicaid piece is never an issue for them, because they're never going to be in a position where Medicaid's an option for them. I'm not, I know if the family says, look, we have no interest in the hunting shack upstate Maine where no one's going, then it's really maybe the deed with the life estate's the easiest way to go, because they're going to get it. They're not going to hang on to it. It's literally just going to be transition it to us and let's get rid of it. So there may be it's not a one is the way to go no matter what. It's really going to be specific. I hate to give you that lawyer answer of it depends, but that's really what it comes down to. It just comes down to the dynamic. If I had to pick out of the four, which one I'm most a fan of, I'm most a fan of the LLC or some type of trust arrangement with a very clearly defined set of rules. And even that can get dicey. So sometimes I think the business arrangement is the best arrangement.
Thank you.
And Jay, if you do the LLC option, how do you handle then the next generation? We have a property that there's already a fourth generation, the original owners, have passed, their two kids own it. Those two kids have kids. Now there's, great grandkids of the original owners. So how do you kind of handle that within the LLC or corporate type setup?
So it's gonna sort of stop at every generation, right? So if when the original owners pass away and then the new owners take over, if you will, now there's my guess is that there's an operating agreement that everybody's working off of, and that operating agreement is going to handle how the shares of the LLC then kind of pass down to the next generation. And so just like with the trust, we tell everybody, if you have a trust set up, how do you handle the trust? And the answer is, well, the rules of the trust are in the trust, if you will. The LLC would operate the same exact way. It should, or it could provide for, this is what's going to happen. And then when the first owners pass and then the second owners take over, they now own shares of the LLC. And then those shares would then pass down to the third generation and the fourth generation. And so there's almost a little bit of dilution in the ownership, but that's what would happen. It's a case of how many members are there in the LLC, and then is everybody staying in? And then you kind of have to figure out who's going to be in charge of the LLC, who's going to manage it. They're going to set up the ownership, the rules for all the members that are in the LLC. So that's where I would look for some guidance as to how it should be handled, which is, what does the LLC allow you to handle?
Jay, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
So the LLC, the party that's the senior, for example, that wants to pass it on,
Yep.
can they be part of the LLC as well, or is that no?
They could be one of the managing members, if they wanted to be, there might be some value in saying, look, we're going to put it in the LLC. And just like the irrevocable trust arrangement, we're going to step away, right? You know, everybody knows who's in charge, even though they're not in charge on paper, but everybody knows to take their direction from mom or dad, for example, or nana and grandpa, whoever it is. But on paper, when somebody comes knocking, they get to put their hands in their pockets and say, look, I have no idea what goes on here. I made this transaction 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. I put this property into this trust or into this LLC. I'm not in control of it anymore. Those guys handle it. But yes, everybody knows. And I would prefer that they not be involved for the same reasons we've seen irrevocable trusts in the past where the client puts the money into an irrevocable trust and they stay as a trustee. And it just doesn't look as clean. It looks like, yeah, I get it. You want your cake and you want to eat it too. It's pretty clear what's going on. How can you sort of, I know there's a trust that says what the rules are, but you're overseeing yourself. And so the LLC could work the same exact way. Do they keep a minority stake in the LLC? I'm in 10%, the kids are in for 90. Maybe you do something like that. But in an ideal world, if the goal is to get this to the next generation and get it transitioned, if you will, I'd like to see if we can kind of cut that string and get it taken care of. Doesn't always work that way, but that's the plan. And then the other piece is the funding piece. Does it make sense to put some other assets in there to provide some liquidity to cover the expenses that might go on with it until people figure out, are we renting it? Are we not renting it? You know, you tend to, what we see is people tend to not be willing to rent it right from Jump Street because all those memories from mom and dad are tied up in there. And then as you get a little distance between that, it starts to feel a little bit more like a business property, and it gets a little easier year 3, year 4 to say, you know what, maybe we will rent it out to offset some of the costs, not a ton, but if the market looks like it's going to work, or we stumble into the right deal, you know, you get these, you know, off-season rentals that if somebody works out and it's perfect and it makes sense for everybody, then you look at it, you know.
And does giving those shares in the corporate type setup become a gift? Like, is it going to trigger gift taxes, or how does
It could, yeah, it could. They have value, so it could. That might be something. So if it's a gift tax scenario, you either play the $16,000 a year game and give them out over time, or the way the gift tax is set up right now, if you give away more than 16,000, nobody owes any money. You just have to report over the $16,000 gift to the feds. And then they take the records that you made a gift of over 16,000, they take your gift tax return, and then they wait. And then when you pass away, they look at it and say, did you give away more than the lifetime exemption? If you didn't, then there's no taxes. And so a lot of folks get jammed up on that over 16 thing, thinking that someone's going to have to write a check. And the answer is no, you're not going to have to write a check. You're just going to tell Uncle Sam you did it. And a lot of people will do that just to say, look, let's get the gift out of here. Let's move it over. Let's get it out of our names. Let's file the gift tax return. And then that's it. We made one big gift instead of a lifetime of $16,000 gifts. That's the idea. Anything else? All right. Well, I'll let everybody get to their beach house if that's what's going on. I hope everybody's heading down someplace warm near the water. Again, salt or fresh, y'all call. Have a great 4th of July holiday. If there's any questions that anybody has as a follow-up, feel free to send us an email or give a call. We can set some time up to go over anything in as much or as little detail as you'd like. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for dialing in, and we hope to see you on the next Java with Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, guys, take care.
Bye.